Recording. Wonderful. And we have, as I said, gone on 7 or 8 trips with Keshet and wanted to go on more, but life keeps intervening. So Kayla, who led us on one of our trips, wrote to me and said that Keshet was ready to offer us just some tastes of Israel, just so that we could stay connected. It's a beautiful and generous offer, and I jumped on it. And so today and for the following 3 Sundays at 11 a.m., we're going to get teachings from different of the teachers at Keshet, teacher and guides. And Ariel's going first. And since it's a week until Chanukah, Ariel suggested he do some teachings about Chanukah. And so that's wonderful. And if you recall, Ariel and his family were with us a little over 2 years ago during Sukkot, when we had him for a whole week. And I hope a lot of you remember that and were able to be part of that. And I've just been missing Ariel and his family since then, unfortunately. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Ariel. Ariel, I'm sure you're pretty experienced with Zoom yourself at this point. So if you want to entertain questions or have people put things in the chat or anything, you decide however you like to do it, okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
We'll go with the flow.
Onward. Yes, our
and with the technology.
Yes.
So again, it's really wonderful to see you all. Very, very moved. And I feel that Chanukah, first of all, if we're talking from Israel, so I'll be guiding almost every evening of Chanukah, because Israelis come from all over the place to Jerusalem to see all the windows filled with Chanukah menorahs. I put just a couple of pictures from previous tours on the sheet that I sent, and I will share later on. But it's so much fun. It's the most beautiful time of the year. So also for Israelis, it's a pleasure to come and be tourists here in Jerusalem at this time. Speaking of tourism and events of Chanukah, there's also always in Haifa the holiday of holidays, bringing together Christmas, Chanukah, and whatever Muslim holiday happens to fall, because it's a lunar year. So it's a different holiday every year, but always to have a celebration of all Abrahamic faiths together around November, December. So that's also a huge, beautiful event happening. So we are all looking forward to Chanukah. And these lights in the windows and on the tables are connecting us on both sides of the ocean. A little difference with dreidel is the dreidels outside of Israel say Nes Gadol Haya Sham. A big miracle was there, meaning Israel, Jerusalem, actually 7-minute walk from where I'm sitting right now. And here we have on the dreidel Nes Gadol Haya Po. A big miracle was here. So I'll mention a little bit of the history also of a holiday, but mainly want to focus on meaning and on 3 aspects of a holiday, both in the historical perspective and for us today. And the 3 aspects will be the soul, the fire which is within us, the body, which is always in a very special relationship with the soul, and the body of a peoplehood, many bodies and souls united together. So these will be 3 aspects that I'll try and kind of touch base on, also in history and also in how we celebrate Chanukah today. And for me, it's really amazing to be able to actually walk not only in the place, but also see many of the sites from the times of Chanukah. if we're talking about the rebellion of the Seleucid against the Seleucid Empire by the Maccabees, so we have the Hellenistic Seleucid site of Alexander the Great and his inheritance. And of course, we have sites built by the Maccabees that we walk through and we see their walls, their water systems, what they did at the Temple Mount. We can actually see it over 2,000 years later. So I'll just remind you of the context. 167 BCE, Israel is not independent, but that's no news. It was not independent beforehand either. We had our autonomy and we paid the taxes to different governors. It was the Persians in the beginning of a Second Temple period, and later on Alexander the Great, and later on his successors, the Ptolemaic and the Seleucid dynasties. And that was fine. Maybe not the best. We would prefer to be independent, but just to remind you that the rebellion was not a war of independence. Only when one specific king, Antiochus Epiphanes, he called himself Epiphany. He saw himself as the revelation of God on earth. Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And he decided to put his sculptures in the temple and to stop freedom of faith. And if we talk about body, about the physical situation, a revolt against an empire by this minority in this land was something unthinkable. But something in the soul said we just have to. The word Maccabee has, depends who you ask what it means, but in the tradition, the word Maccabee, the M stands for the Hebrew word me in the acronym, the K, Kamocha, B, Ba'elim, and the Yud is for the name of God, Adonai. Who is like you, God, our Lord? It's actually a quote from the book of Exodus, which is attributed to Judah the Maccabee, that brings more and more people to join this revolt. So it begins from the soul, from a soul that will not take tyranny, against all odds, against all physical odds. And then from the soul, it goes to the body. And these people give a fight. Because at the end of the story, it's battles in the battlefield against an empire. The revolt breaks at the year 167 BCE. 4 big battles and many little battles taken all over the country. Huge wisdom in each battle. And it ends on the 25th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev. It doesn't really end, but that's the peak, with coming back to the Temple of Jerusalem, taking out the sculptures, reestablishing the altar, reestablishing the worship. That is what the whole revolt broke for. That's a big story told in the 2 books of Maccabees. By the way, the first book of Maccabees was written in Hebrew. The second book of Maccabees written in Greek. These are 2 separate books with the same name. And by the way, they tell different stories about Chanukah. One says how they were in battle during the Sukkot. So they had to have 8 days of a celebration. The other says 8 days of celebrating the rebuilding of the altar of the temple. None of them mention a more minor story in their perspective of the oil that lasted for 8 days. There was no pure oil to light the menorah in the temple. And they found 1 jar. That story appears for the first time Actually, we find it from Roman times, a little after the events, the description of one jar of oil that was enough for 8 days, that miracle, which will be remembered much more than the miracle of a victory and from the physical and spiritual heroism of the Maccabees. And I think we should ask also why and what this miracle and the lighting of Chanukah today represents. So to remind you, but when we celebrate Chanukah, we celebrate 164 BCE. And we don't really tell our children and grandchildren all about what happened a little later. A little later, they forgot what Thomas Jefferson did and what the Bible teaches and what the French Revolution brought to the world, the idea of separation of power, the idea of having the church and the state two different entities that do not mix. According to biblical law, the king and the high priest are different people with different authorities. But when the Maccabees come to power after the just revolution, they use the power for mixture of religion and state. Jonathan, one of the Maccabees, anoints himself as king and high priest. And later on, the high priest will always be a political role. And the corruption celebrates. Power corrupts. Another message of Chanukah that we don't really bother to tell. But the people, the descendants of the Maccabees themselves, and later on their descendants in the Jewish independence of Judah, used power in the wrong way. So that physical power did not bring forward the sincere spiritual intentions that were there to begin with. As we said, power corrupts. Not very surprising. And it's not very surprising that the rabbis later on will not wish to commemorate the Maccabees after what they did to the rabbis themselves. The rabbis were the opposition to the corruption when the Maccabees actually ruled. And the rabbis bring up that miracle that was minor, the flame of fire that continued to light the menorah for 8 days, although it was a little oil, enough only for one. I want to pause maybe for a second also on that meaning of the menorah and that light, which definitely reflects also spiritual light, talking about fire. And I'd go to the symbol of the state of Israel. So second, I'll open that document I sent, and perhaps, take me a moment. But already begin with a question as I open it. Yeah, found it. The emblem, the symbol of the state of Israel. What does it stand for? Anyone? If anyone wants to share or have questions until now, perhaps I'll stop this before I move forward. Any thoughts, questions before moving on? Looking at the chat. Recording. Okay,
if anyone wants to raise their hand too, we can spot you.
Can we see that symbol again for a moment, Ariel?
Yes, I'm coming. So I'm coming, moving forward. Great. I just wanted to make sure you're with me until now. So this is the symbol of the state of Israel. Right, the menorah. Underneath the name Israel, which is the name of the state. By the way, the name is introduced for the first time in the last weekly Torah reading. I think it's a fascinating story. And the two branches of olive. So that, of course, the symbol of the state of Israel since it was established in 1948. And what does it mean? And I think that will also remind us the meaning of a menorah back at the time of a temple.
Well, may I?
Anyone?
Yeah,
Thoughts?
just that the menorah was the seven-branched candelabra in the temple. The Chanukah that we created later is not the same.
Of course.
So
I'll be going there soon.
yeah.
I put there pictures of the menorah and the Chanukah. I wonder if you can see this coin I brought with me, especially for you. Let's see if you can see it. Yeah, you can see it. See it? This coin.
Yes.
You see the menorah?
Yeah.
It's the menorah of the last Maccabee king. By the way, it's worth a quarter or a little less. It's the Israeli coin, but all our coins have something of a Jewish Israeli history and archaeology. The menorah is an ancient symbol. It was coined by the Maccabees. We find it, of course, it appears for the first time in the book of Exodus, chapter 25, in Mount Sinai. It even says that God shows Moses a picture of the menorah. So that is the most ancient symbol of a Jewish people. And the olive branches, what do they mean?
Wouldn't they have something to do with the dove that Noah sent out and brought back?
Perfect. Book of Genesis, chapter 9. The dove, by the way, it wasn't a dove. To all of us English speakers, it says a pigeon. In Hebrew, there's no difference between white, gray, or black pigeons. We don't have a different word. It says pigeon. It's only in English languages that we took the white pigeon, which is called a rock dove, or a rock pigeon, to represent the story. But in any event, the branch of the olive represents peace, the end of the catastrophe of the flood. And this symbol already appears in the Bible. Book of Zechariah, chapter 4, the prophet at the times of the Second Temple, towards the end of the Bible, at least of a biblical chronology. And he gives us this revelation, this vision. The angel who talked with me came back, woke me as a man is awakened from his sleep. He said to me, "What do you see?" And I answered, "I see a lampstand, all of gold," the menorah, it says, of course, in Hebrew, with a bowl above it. The lamps on it are 7 in number, and the lamps above it have 7 pipes. And by it are 2 olive trees, one on the right and one on the left. I skipped a little bit. The text is actually pretty funny. The angel asks Zechariah, "What do you think this means?" And Zechariah says, "I don't know. You tell me, because you showed it to me. Why should I know what it means?" And then the angel explains as follows. The meaning of a menorah with 2 olive branches. This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is the leader of the Jews at that time period in Persian times. Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. So the Bible tells us that the meaning of this light is the spirit, the soul. And the rabbis understood that the independence, the physical independence of the Maccabees and their great success was not something that will last for long. It actually lasts for 90 years. The Roman Empire already takes over Jerusalem at the year 63 BCE. So they had about 90 years of independence, give or take. But the spiritual message is something that can move on into Roman times, even into exile. And it did. So the story that prevailed in the tradition was not the story of the courage of the Maccabees, but the story of the light of a menorah. And in order to remember the miracle of the oil that gave light for 8 days, we light, as John said correctly, 8 days. We light the menorah in memory of that menorah that lit for 8 days, by the way. Right now, we are celebrating. I remember that when I was with you, we talked about agricultural events and agricultural meanings of the different holidays. So right now, it's a huge festival all over Israel of the harvest of olives. And yes, right. These
Now is the time of the olive harvest?
yeah, it's between October and November.
Oh,
So this month, it depends where. By the end towards Chanukah, it's already not so much in Jerusalem. You need to go all the way to the Galilee. That's one of the suggestions of why it took 8 days to bring pure oil. They needed to go all the way to the Galilee to harvest olives in the north. In the south, they harvest earlier. Well, that's an interesting theory for why did it take 8 days. But this is the time of harvesting olives. It's the time of more of the shortest day of the year. So in Indian religions and Christianity and Roman religions, we have traditions of celebrating light. And we're celebrating the light of the olive oil of the menorah that miraculously gave it light, gave it its light back then, but I think as an idea, it still does. Even after the destruction of the temple, even after we have, if we come back to that emblem of a state, why did the menorah, or why does the menorah look like this and not like the menorah I showed you on the coin? This is the menorah from Titus's arch in Rome. He took it, but we still have a light. Without a temple, without the original authentic menorah from the temple, we still preserve that inner light, the spiritual light, and we light it every Chanukah. For so many generations, it's unbelievable. And I think this holiday has something very, very special about it. It's a holiday, first of all, if we talk about the light of the menorah, you know you're supposed to, if you can, light it in your window or in your doorpost, in the entrance to in the street. Unlike the Shabbat candles that you light inside, it is an outreach. It is something that is part of a collective culture of Jewish people worldwide. It's a huge celebration, and it's a celebration that is supposed to be the most accessible to everyone. And it's also lots of fun. It's not something very demanding like other holidays. It's a get-together of Jewish people all over the world uniting around that light. So we have this spiritual event that Jews celebrate, and it's always something that is very family oriented, and not only family, it is also outreaching outside the home. There's a collectiveness. Also, when Judah the Maccabee called everybody to join him, and they did, around that spirit, and also today when we celebrate. And perhaps two more sources that I think really represent beautifully that collective spirit. The first quote I'll bring is by Theodor Herzl. And by the way, in the tour that I'll give this evening, we'll stand next to the home in Jerusalem, where he visited in 1898, a year after the first Zionist Congress. I'll remind you that in 1897, Herzl wrote in his diary, "In Basel, I founded the Jewish state. If I say it out loud, everybody will mock me. But in 5 years, maybe. In 50 years, definitely, everybody will know I was right." Thus, he writes in 1980, translate from Hebrew back, 1897. And this is what he writes about the menorah. I think a beautiful piece. Second. I'm aware you're not seeing it. Yeah. The menorah spread the light. The children's eyes shined. A parable and resemblance to the awakening of a nation. At first, one candle, and there's much darkness. And the only candle is still sad till the darkness will pass, until the darkness will pass completely. First light will shine on the young, the poor, and they will be accompanied by others, lovers of justice, truth, freedom, progress, humanity, beauty. And when all the candles are lit, we will be amazed and rejoice at all that was done. So Herzl takes that custom that we will mention of lighting one candle in the first night and 2 candles in the second night and 3 candles in the third until the 8th as a collective idea, just like Judah the Maccabee, if you wish. One person comes, one leader can change the world. And then he'll be joined by another and another and another. And this collective inspiration will bring this miracle that I have the privilege of sitting in, called the State of Israel, says Herzl in the 19th century. Another little piece already within the history of the State of Israel that I found that kind of really gives the collective feeling of the holiday. Naomi Shemel, one of the most talented Israeli poets and songwriters, the one who wrote Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem of Gold. Some thought that should be the new anthem of Israel. So at Chanukah 1970, she goes to visit soldiers on the Suez Canal. At the time, that was the border between Israel and Egypt. And she writes, at Chanukah, I went down to visit the strongholds on the banks of the Suez Canal. In one stronghold, they showed me a huge menorah from shells. They had all these used shells, so they had to improvise. They improvised this huge menorah. The soldiers told me how they light this menorah, and every evening of a holiday, they sing the Ma'oz Tzur Yeshuati in loud voices heard by the Egyptians on the other side of the canal. Singing in a loud voice. You know, the reason we are supposed to put the Chanukah, the Chanukah menorahs out over our windows and sing, the whole concept is to say, well, we believe in miracles. And we We don't hide them, we publish them. Here in the old city, there's a film producer who says, I know something about publicity. So if I need to publicize the miracle, that's the commandment. And I want groups to come to the little alley to see and remember the miracle. So he brings out coffee and tea, and he builds a huge Lego menorah. So people will come and see, because that's a commandment, to give publicity to the miracle as a collective, and to remember that we sing here Shema bayamim ahem bazman hazeh. Back in the time and today, we have heroes and we have miracles. That's part of the big messages of the holiday. So we've been talking about, just a second, I'm trying to come back here. Enough with that. So also in history, and also in the way we celebrate today, we've been talking about these different elements. First of all, it all begins with a fire inside, the spiritual. And then there's a physical, very clear outcome of the spiritual. May it be the battle of the Maccabees, or the huge celebration, the out loud, the action that comes from that passion, that fire that can move us to activism and to action. And that activism is never left alone. And the physical body has more and more meaning the more it connects to other bodies and to more people within the peoplehood and humanity. So I wish to offer, I would say, a thought and a blessing. Beginning with a thought. When you light the Chanukah candle, this coming holiday, next week, next Sunday, you light the first one. I would suggest perhaps to ask, what is the flame now which is in my soul? What does my body feel when I connect to that flame? And how do these feelings connect to other people, to a community, to other people maybe in the world or that are near you in the family? So kind of three ideas that we've been seeing all the time in our little conversation about Chanukah. The soul, the spirit, the passion, the flame, the body, and the peoplehood. And a little argument which will turn out to be a little blessing that I wish to give you. The story of Chanukah is mentioned in the Talmud in the tractate of Shabbat, and there's an argument actually of how to celebrate between the two great rabbis in Roman times in the Second Temple period, Hillel and Shammai. Shammai said, just like the oil in the menorah in the temple gradually was less and less until the 8th day when they brought the new oil, so we will light 8 candles in the first day, and then 7, and then 6, and then 5, and so on, until in the last day we'll light 1, and then we'll separate for the holiday. And Hillel gave that idea that Herzl gave 2,000 years before Herzl, that light has a tendency to grow every day. Once you begin, it can grow and become larger and larger and larger, as was the miracle, that every day the miracle was larger. And that's what we remember when we light more and more light every day. And I would like to offer you a blessing that in your lives, with your families, with people you love, you will see more and more light every day, also in Chanukah, but also throughout the year. And to say thank you very much for the privilege of spending some time with you on this Sunday brunch.
Let's have, thank you, Ariel. Kol hakavod. I have some thoughts I wanted to share, and perhaps other people do too. I'm thinking about that passage from Zechariah, from the prophet Zechariah, that is also the Haftarah we read on Chanukah, that says he has this vision, as you said, of the 7-branched golden menorah which stood in the temple, and the 2 olive trees pouring pure oil into the lamps. And what does it mean? It means not by might and not by power, but by my spirit, says Adonai Tzvaot. And here's the, Ariel sharing this passage. This is the word of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, not by might, nor by power, but by spirit, said the Lord of hosts. And Ariel was saying that in the book of Maccabees, there are 2 versions. There's the Hebrew version and the Greek version, Book of Maccabees 1 and 2, which recount the history of the rebellion. And neither of them mention the miracle of the oil. That's correct, right, Ariel?
Right.
And Ariel was saying we don't hear about the miracle of the oil until at least, I don't know, 100, 150 years later. And I'm thinking that the way you described, the rabbis really hated the Hasmonean regime because, as Ariel said, they consolidated the high priesthood with the king, putting unqualified people into the high priesthood. And the Maccabees, the Hasmonean regime, also went on wars of conquest, was notoriously corrupt. And the rabbis opposed them for their abuse of power. And it seems that the story of the oil, which doesn't appear in the historical record, was created by the rabbis to minimize the Maccabees' role in the historic conquest and maximize the spiritual resistance and nature of the holiday. And one of the insight I got while you were talking, Ariel, which surprises me that I never saw before, but that is the way it is with insights, is that the story of the oil lasting for 8 days, the pure oil and the need to find the pure oil, is a rabbinic midrash on that passage from Zechariah, that they needed pure olive oil. And the message was not by might and not by power, but by my spirit. So then it becomes a classic Jewish rabbinic kind of way of using a biblical passage to highlight an understanding of the story. That's what I was thinking about, Ariel. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
So that's beautiful. And that's what we read in Chanukah. And I would perhaps add the chapter of that's kind of a struggle, body and spirit, that continue throughout history. So with Jewish nationalism coming back to life in modern times, 3 stories were reborn in the way we tell them. So here I'm sitting in my mother's and father's house, and my father, who grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania, was taught a song, "I would like to be a Maccabee." I won't sing it because it would be hard. I would like to be a Maccabee, so big and tall and strong. And if there's a Jewish sportsman, a boxer, a baseball player, so now he'll be a source for admiration. And we have the Maccabea, which is the Jewish Olympics. So with and the Israeli songs, there's a famous Israeli song that says, "We had no miracle. We didn't find any jar of oil. We carved we carved the rock until we bled, and then light came." So these two kind of perspectives, the body and the spirit, are in the struggle from day one. And also today in the state of Israel, there are those who emphasize one aspect, there are those that emphasize another. And from my acquaintance with this beautiful congregation, I thought this is the place to bring them together, body and soul, and to think of both aspects. It's very important to have a strong body. And and the question of how this body affects the soul and how this soul affects the body back was kind of a question that came up to me when I thought of meeting you.
Oh, thank you. Abigail Ensman raised her hand. Please, Abigail.
What came to mind, firstly, Ariel, that was such a beautiful teaching. Thank you so much. And when you said I had an insight, Jonathan, and with all this light, an insight is Gilui Or, opening up the light, and that the lights of the menorah should open us up more and more to more insights into Torah.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And perhaps when we take a photograph, we can think of it as an insight of what we see, because the word photo is light and graph is writing. So actually to try and grasp the light we see all around.
Beautiful. Ariel, I'm going to keep asking questions, but feel free to other people raise their hands as well. Ariel, if I recall, in the early Zionist debates, there was a debate whether the menorah should be on the flag or the Jewish star should be on the flag. And there was a compromise. Can you tell me what that was again, how that worked?
But there was also the flag that Herzl made was actually 7 Jewish stars, which is also an interesting combination, because he was for the idea of a 7-hour workday in his vision of state. So the number 7 comes many times. But eventually the different Jewish symbols took different places. So the emblem, the symbol was the menorah, and the flag is the talus, and the Jewish, the Magen David, which is a much later symbol, but that became really the national symbol of Zionism way before the state. So it did prevail in many ways, and it's very interesting. But you'll see them being combined in statues all over the country. Right. The number 7 is also, I'm sure you'll have a lot of, the world was created in something wholesome, if to make a long story short.
Question, when did the Magen David, the star, kind of move in and seems to take our imagination a little bit more strongly in later times?
Good question.
The earliest documented Star of David as a Jewish symbol is Prague of the 14th century. We find it everywhere. We find it also in Islam and also in Indian culture as a decoration, but and there are traditions that it goes way back, and I could show you a beautiful idea of how the Star of David is actually an ancient Hebrew, could be a signature of David. But that is, it's an idea. It may be right, it may be wrong. But if we want to talk about documented history, so it begins when the community of Prague were allowed to have their own symbol, and it spread out in the last 700 years or so.
From what I read in an article by Gershom Sholem many years ago, Ariel, it wasn't really, it didn't, the six-pointed star did not become a, oh, Joel has to go in. Have a good celebration, Joel. I'm so happy to see you.
Bye.
That the six-pointed star does not become a ubiquitous Jewish symbol until the 19th century, when Judaism starts being considered one of the monotheistic faiths. And there's the crescent and there's the cross. And that's when the six-pointed star becomes a ubiquitous Jewish symbol, ironically, not until pretty much the 19th century, whereas the menorah, we have archaeological evidence going back to the very beginning of, it's going as far back as Jewish symbols go. It's fascinating to me.
I guess
Yeah.
it's harder to hang one on your neck than it is the little star here.
Yes.
No, but what? How did they call Chanukah menorah in the old country? Anyone knows? They called it lempelach. Lempel in Yiddish is just the lamp. That's what Herzl used, because this is what I read to you was a translation. He used the word lempelach, the Chanukah lamp. And perhaps you know the Knesset member, and perhaps soon the Prime Minister of Israel, Yair Lapid. So his name was, his father's name was Tommy Lempel. And he made it from Yiddish to Hebrew, Lapid. Lapid means torch. So that's another little connection. And Eliezer ben Yehuda, who revived the Hebrew language, like together with many other people also that are less famous. So he gave the name Chanukiah for the Chanukah menorah. So all us Hebrew speakers use today the word Chanukiah, although it's a brand new word in a historical perspective.
Mhm.
Wow.
Wow.
Anyone else have comments or?
Yeah,
Questions?
Betty is raising her hand.
Ah, good. Betty, you have to unmute.
So I really thank you for this. This has brought together a dilemma for me. It's resolved a dilemma.
Wow.
Because I'm Jewish by choice. And so I was taught at Hanukkah, you know, you sing about the Maccabees and you tell the story of the Maccabees and you tell about the miracle of the oil. So being a good Jew, I would always make sure I gave a Hanukkah party at school. And only one teacher denied me. Out of six years, only one teacher denied me. Okay, next year when he smelt the latkes, he had second thoughts. But okay, so I would do all of that, and I would tell the story about the miracle of the oil, along with all the other stuff. And we'd even dance the hora, and we'd have latkes and everything at school, and they'd all get chocolate coins, and the whole works. Then I went through a series of rabbis and people who said, "Oh, but that really didn't happen. The miracle of the oil really didn't happen." And I felt betrayed because here I had stood up in all of these grades and told this story. And there was never anything tied in that I could bring it back to where you've brought it to relate this miracle of the oil. You could just tell it and that it happened. And if anybody raised any questions, then you can just go back to the idea of spirit and light. And it doesn't have to come in then just to fighting battles. It can come into, if you don't want to go to fighting battles because people have a lot of ire and anger at Israel always defending something, okay, and getting into a war, you can relate it to hatred. How we can make this light grow to fight hatred, which we are experiencing a lot of these days. So that's what I wanted to say. I really think that what you have said resolved this issue of it didn't happen, it did, it didn't, you know, you don't have to get into that battle.
So I'll just say amen to your idea of spreading light as spreading love.
Mhm.
Amen. Thank
Ariel,
you.
what's the tour you're leading this evening? You might have to go soon.
I'm good. I'm actually you're right. But you know, I have
Hold on.
10 minutes.
Tell
I'm
us.
good.
So we'll end in a couple of minutes, but tell us who you're leading and what you're going to do this evening, since we've got you in Jerusalem there.
Well, it's many evenings. Today, it's actually lately I've been guiding quite a few members of medical crews that have been working very, very hard this year and are given a treat to come and have some kind of something for the spirit and kind of to breathe a little bit after a year of a lot of hard work. So actually, I gave a tour around the shuk to people of the Ministry of Medicine, and also today it's a medical crew that have been given kind of a treat. Now they're having a nice dinner in Mitcham Tachana. And after the nice dinner, I'll be taking them for a walk in the neighborhoods of Jerusalem with few spiritual ideas. And I'll always take the bother to say thank you. And because we tell so many stories of history and meaning and how this nation and state were built. And I feel that people that work very hard for it to happen today are many times taken for granted. But if you see the big picture, so we learn to appreciate every chapter, and that we are at chapter 2. Speaking of medicine, so there was the struggle of your grandfather against malaria here in the 19th century. And today there are people who give struggle against the plague. And it's and right now, I'll also say it's booming with people kind of coming out after a very harsh year. So many tours, and I'm only guiding Israelis now because that's the tourists are not back yet, and we'll see where I'll end up, because this is lots of fun. Also,
a whole different experience, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we're going to let you, Joan, briefly.
You're muted.
I think it's beautiful that you've given us a focus on the wedding of body and soul, spirit, the faith, because now when I light that menorah, I'm going to feel that I'm physicalizing my identity in a way that I can share with people. And I'm, in a very non-Jewish neighborhood. So when I put that menorah in the window, it's kind of special that I'm letting people know who I am. And I like that that you've really given us a historic blend and a focus on that. That literally the lighting of that menorah will be an expression of my faith and a connection through the generations. I want to thank you for bringing our focus in that direction.
Oh, thank you, Joan.
I must say, I'm far more moved than from everything that I heard from you than from anything that I said. But if I inspired these beautiful words, so I am very satisfied.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
And Ariel, before you go, I just want to add that you probably, I'm sure you're aware that in Hasidic teachings that I'm aware of, and also in the Zohar, ner, candle or lamp, is understood to be nefesh and ruach. Nefesh being the kind of our physical life force, and ruach being our spirit that come together. And another one is nefesh, is also understood as ner, patil, and shemen. The light, the wick, and the oil, and so that our whole being is a combination of the ineffable flame and the wick and the body that sustain it, that carry it. So I just wanted to share that too, because it's just what you were teaching.
Thank you. Beautiful. Perhaps share that YouTube. I sent a Hebrew
conclude?
song with English subtitles, which is it's called Biglal HaRuach, because of the spirit. And the kind of the line that repeats itself is, you and I and the fire that is beside me will have a victory, not because of strength, but because of spirit. So
Can you play it?
I probably can. Let me see. Going back from here. I think we're getting there. Here it is. Okay, and now I need to share it with a voice. Okay, I'm trying.
Oh, you're fine.
Not translated correctly. Sorry. It's me, you, and the fire. Happy Chanukah, everybody.
Thank you.
Gotta run.
Same to you. Happy Hanukkah.
Hanukkah. Thank you.
Thank
Ariel
you.
was very inspiring, your explanation. It was fantastic.
Yep.
מרגש מאוד.
תודה
Yeah.
רבה, דוד.
Oh, and by the way, everyone, next Sunday, Yitzhak Sokolov, who founded Keshet, is going to give us a political update from Israel. And, you know, it's all questions. He'll field anything we throw at him. So that's next Sunday. Ariel, I'm going to see you in person in the Bagoof in end of December.
בגוף, בנפש וברוח.
כל ביחד, נכון. And I'm going to hug you.
Looking
Wow.
forward, can't wait.
We
Okay.
envy you.
Okay, I gotta run. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Thanks for the time.
Bye. Thank you.
Oh,
כל טוב,
God.
אריאל.
Thank you, Aria. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ariel.
Sehr
Thank
gesund.
you.
Many
you.
thanks,
Thanks for
Aria.
lighting the
Happy to
light.
see you.
Yep. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yes.